Everyone knows this meeting is being recorded.
Recording in progress.
Alrighty. So we'll go over some of the land use map because I know I got a lot of email questions about that. So we'll go over the land use map, and we can do that as a kind of a Q&A. If you have any more questions, we can kind of zoom in on GIS, look at the current land use plan and any of sort of the administrative updates that are going to be made to that. And then after that, we'll go into the CSD, and James will sort of head that part of the conversation. So let me actually, let me share my screen. That way I can kind of go over some of the initial questions I got from the email about the map and any other questions that you have too. I'm on my desktop, so I need the big screen today, so I don't have video on my desktop. It's on my laptop, but that screen is like tiny and too hard to kind of juggle multiple programs. So let's see, let me share my screen. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so I think you can all see my screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the kind of current version of the the adopted land use plan that's in the Rowland Heights Community Plan right now. This is from the 1980 plan. So you can see it has, it's various designations, but none of this is parcel based. So there are large areas that are designated via land use. Land use is separate from zoning. It's a bit more of a zoomed out view. So you can see that, this is kind of this map, essentially this plan with all its sort of line designations here with like kind of the squiggly lines here. All of that was transferred into our GIS system as it is, because this is what's adopted. And so that's kind of, this is the adopted plan. And so this got translated into our GIS system. And what we're realizing now, actually we've known for a while, but as we're updating, part of the area plan sort of mandate is to update these maps and update the Rowland Heights community plan as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this out so you can kind of see how this has been adopted, and I'm going to get into our GIS system, which is also something you can access. The public GIS system has the land use layers and the zoning and all of that. So I'm going to get in there and kind of show you some of the areas that I think I got questions about. And, I can't see raised hands right now. So feel free to just sort of talk, because I can't actually see if there are raised hands here. So yeah, feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. All right, so I know there was some questions about this, the commercial on the land use plan, and I said that's something that needs to be updated. I hope you all saw that email. This is the present Rowland Heights. I'll zoom out a little bit more. So this is what's in the GIS system now. This is what you can pull up at home. This is what's adopted. So this is that map that I showed you that was adopted in the plan. That's that map translated into the GIS system. But all the lines essentially are the same. And when I zoom in, you'll see that they do not follow parcels at all. And part of what we're doing now is sort of making some of those fixes with, the technology that's been kind of advanced since the Rowland Heights plan was adopted, to make them parcel bound, so we have a bit less of this land use policy designations sort of splitting parcels up in different ways. So one of the things that was actually adopted and as is existing is this commercial zone. I'm not commercial zone, sorry, it's a commercial land use designation that I have my cursor circling around. This is where Pathfinder Park is in some residential development. And this is one of the things we're going to be updating. Because while a commercial land use does allow a park and some residential, when we're going to be also converting the Rowland Heights land use policy designations to be consistent with the general plan one. So what's commercial here under the Rowland Heights land use policy will become commercial general in the commercial areas. But this is really something that it needs to be updated. It doesn't reflect actually what's adopted, and so we want the land use to be closer to what actually has been adopted through the zoning and through the updates. And it's not completely inconsistent, but it's not really reflective of what's there. And since we're doing updates to the map, like administrative updates to bring it into line with the parcel boundaries, we're also kind of doing these cleanups. So essentially we're calling they're administrative cleanups. And so this is that red area.
What will that area now be?
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually have it reflect what's there. So Pathfinder Park is here. So that's gonna be open space. It's called Open Space Parks and Recreation, the general land use category. So it's OSPR. So that's what the Pathfinder Park is gonna be, OSPR. So that whole area, that's, as you can see, C. So this yellow line that I'm kind of tracing with the arrow, that's what's kind of translated from that paper map that was adopted into this GIS system. This is what's the C, that red area that I was showing you. That's what this is. So you can see there's Pathfinder Park there, which will be OSPR. It's an open space land use designation. But you can see there's also residential that's existing. I can show you that in the aerial. It's adopted residential. So that also has a commercial land use designation, and we're going to change that to reflect what it is actually now, which is the general plan land use equivalent is H5 or H9. So we're going to change it to that land use designation so it reflects the housing that's here. And then there's another weird glitch that again happens with the translation of these lines in the paper map into the GIS world. So what we see here, and this is kind of common where there's open space boundaries with residential. So these properties here, I'll zoom out so I can show you a little more clearly. So this yellow squiggly line here that goes around like this, that's O. And where's the O? Where did it go? Well, I'll click on it and see that's all O. And so what happens here is that you have some, I think, O with residential uses. And again, it's, when they were doing these sort of subdivisions, they kind of also took into account that the translation of the parcel line, of the map to parcel lines wasn't, it wasn't developed according to parcel lines. So that's some of the corrections we'll be making as well. And anytime we'll be changing O to like an H5 or an H9, it will only be where it is reflective of residential on the ground for the administrative changes. So that's kind of, oh, here's the O. So that O encompasses this whole area, but it also encompasses these properties here. And so what you'll see when we do our updated land use policy map with the administrative changes is that some of these will go from O, because they're houses, to H5. And it's in these weird sort of pockets where because the lines weren't parcel based, there's kind of some overlap of what's open space in the paper map, but is actually, was adopted as a subdivision with the required sort of park space. So the park space will go to OSPR, and these sort of houses will go to I think H5, as will these that are in the O designation now. So I hope that clarifies some of what I was getting emails about. So the corrections that we'll do to the land use plan will be to take, show that commercial changing to the different designations of OSPR, H5. And this isn't the only area where that happens, because if I zoom out, you'll see. So these kind of lines are, again, not parcel based. And so some of what we're doing is actually making those changes where there are the inconsistencies between like the boundary areas to make them reflective of what's actually adopted and developed. So that's kind of what's going on here. And even in this case, you'll see like there's some park space that's O, but it's actually in the, was it U1 over here area? So that's another inconsistency that needs to be kind of updated too. So these kind of yellow lines here, yellowish lines, those are the boundaries of the adopted land use plan that don't exactly follow parcel lines. So we'll be making those adjustments to reflect like what is on the ground and what has been adopted. So I hope that clarifies some of the weird stuff you might see in the administrative changes for the land use map. And some of the updates like that commercial, which is really, it's kind of gone in a different direction. So commercial is not really appropriate on Pathfinder. It was something that was in the actual plan adopted, but that will be changing. And it's already clearly developed as uses that I think are more appropriate for the area. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The open space that we're looking at, are they private land?
Some of that, like say, this, well,
like this big piece, like, is that private land or is that county land?
I don't think that's county land. Some of it might be Puente Hills land. Let's see. If it's OS, the zoning generally has been more updated over the years. So if it has a zone of OS, that's generally indicative of the fact that it's been open space. But say this O, that's A15, that may be actually privately owned. But generally what's been adopted as OS on the zoning level, that's generally what is actually park space. So the thing that, the discrepancy again, because that land use plan, which had the O designations, wasn't parcel based and was kind of done at a very zoomed out level, that kind of needs to be translated to this kind of technology and have it adhere more closely to parcel lines and to some of the zoning's actually been updated more recently than the land use plan.
What is the Era Energy considered?
Let's see. Some of the Era property, let me see. Okay, so let's say like this area that's partly Era owned. So this is another kind of, I think I explained this before too, a long while back. The plan had some designations that really aren't reflective of current needs and sort of directions as far as like, preservation, environmental considerations, climate considerations. So this area had a land use designation of what we call transitional open space. Meaning that an open space was used pretty like broadly, meaning undeveloped, but it was actually, as you know, oil fields. And what the plan, the actual Rowland Heights, the adoptive plan said was that these areas, when they stop being oil fields, can transition to housing. Now, in today's terms, that's really something that is not entirely appropriate. And also, because of some of the oil well issues that there may be longer term sort of pollution, toxic sort of issues in the area that need a whole lot of review before anything can become housing. But what we're taking these designations, because again, transitional open space is not really, it's a kind of a murky term. But it's privately owned, so what we're going to take these to is what we call the rural lands land use designation. So it'll be RL, and then RL depending on sort of the property size, RL10, RL20. I think I can show you in South Diamond Bar, where it's not part of the Rowland Heights plan, what there is there, and we're going to make that sort of consistent across. So like, let's see in South Diamond Bar here, you have like, let's get to a parcel. It should show zoning's A2, but oh shoot, I don't have the, let me click the land use policy. Here we go. And that should show us what it is. So if I click on there, you'll see it's RL10. This one would be like, I think RL20. So those, because those are kind of much more consistent, they're all, again, privately owned. So that would be much more consistent to what this should be. This whole like diagonal area, this like weird thing, that's the transitional open space, which is, again, a very misleading sort of name for the term. Maybe, you know, when it was adopted, it was a clearer term, but since then, I think open space has kind of changed what it means and how it's used as a term. So these would be going to rural land designations, RL10, RL20, that sort of number.
What do rural land designations mean?
Essentially, so like your H5, H10, those would be your residential designations in developed areas. Rural lands is essentially areas that are either agricultural or can have, you know, very, you know, lower density like house. So RL10 would require essentially a minimum density of like one dwelling unit per 10 acres. RL20 would be one dwelling unit per 20 acres. So it's much more of a rural designation, which is appropriate here. We don't think the H designations are appropriate here, or what would be, like the H designations would be equivalent in the Rowland Heights plan to the U designations. And the RL designations would be kind of comparable to the N designations, if that makes sense. Does that clarify some of what this is? I know this is kind of a different, it's a different direction in policy, but I think it's a different direction because that's really kind of what's needed now in our era, that as times and things have changed.
So that, just to clarify, so the Era Energy will not have housing to exceed one dwelling per 10 or 20 acres.
That's what we're proposing for those areas, which are like, they're like U transitional open space N2, and those ones would be either RL, depending on the size, RL5, 10, 20. Some of their parcel sizes are a lot smaller, so that would reflect what the parcels, like the general sort of parcel size. But again, we don't think any of the U designations, which are the H designations, are really appropriate here. On our end, they can challenge that, and they can, you know, like come in at some point in the future with some sort of a, you know, proposal to change things. But this is what we're proposing for those changes in this area. It's consistent with, again, what's in South Diamond Bar, and those areas are also quite similar. South Diamond Bar doesn't have the oil fields, but it has the same topography, the same constraints. Again, and this is all SEA except for, I think, I can turn on the SEA layer. So SEA is another, you know, it's another layer of biological resource protections that requires that they do a biological analysis and have our, what we call the Significant Ecological Area Technical Advisory Committee do a hearing on how they're sort of addressing or preserving the biological resources that are there and directing any development on the property away from those areas.
Okay, so these will all be RL, hopefully.
RL, yeah, that's what we're proposing in our, I mean, again, we don't know how they'll respond, but that's what we're proposing. Actually, where's the essay? Sorry, let me find it. Okay, here we go. This might be hard to see over the land use map, so I'm going to turn the land use map off temporarily so that we can actually see the SEA, and I can show you what is considered SEA and what is not. So here, that's a little easier to see. This area because it was, again, developed with the oil fields and has had a lot of the native vegetation removed. This is not SCA here. This dashed area, this is all SCA, and it goes kind of all the way up into here, and all of South Diamond Bar, this whole unincorporated area is all SCA. It goes up to here, so it covers pretty much the whole area in the hillside except for this area here.
So in the area that is currently has the oil fields, what can be put there?
That's what we're saying is going to go to RL.
Okay.
Same designation as these. Because really, I mean, the oil wells are kind of, and they're a mineral resource type of use, which would be much more in line with agricultural, I mean, a different kind, but it goes in, the mineral resource stuff goes under kind of the A zones and the RL category. Does anyone else have any questions about that? So I know that this is like highly technical, and some of these administrative cleanups and changes to get the land use policy map to be closer to what the parcel boundaries are is going to show a lot of weird things. So you might see like O going to H5 or O going to H9, and again, those would be only in the kind of situation where I was showing you before, where it has that this sort of area here. So, and once we get the map updated, I can go through that again with you so that it's clear that there's really nothing that is currently has a zone of open space and is publicly owned would be changing. It would just really be to reflect kind of these properties, because in some ways having that O designation, in one of them it's the entire property, you know, can be a burden for the property owner over time with financing and things like that. The zoning is correct actually on here, so it is RPD as part of this plan development, but for whatever reason, because the land use policy map never adhered to parcel lines, it was not changed to also be like an H5. So yeah, when we get the land use plan updated and some of those, designations like the commercial updated to what it is like park space, then you'll kind of see that some of these boundary areas between residential and open space will have swapping. Some of the open space that's designated like this, OS, might in some areas have like little slivers that are RPD zone, and those will then be changed to like an OS zone. So you'll see some of these weird slivers of land that are kind of being changed from either an O to an H5, or like what we call a U1 in the RH Rowland Heights plan to like an OS PR or OSC. So that, I hope when we get that map updated, I can go through it and clarify what some of that confusion might be, because I know that these are kind of sensitive issues and concerns, and I want to make sure that it's clear that these are administrative, that at least this part of it is administrative changes. I think most of what you're going to see, like south of Pathfinder, would all be administrative changes, as you know, the anything that's like the growth oriented stuff or the zone changes, those are really just along that Colima section. Nothing that's supportive of like a bit more housing options is going to be anywhere off of that general Colima corridor.
Hello, this is Roy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Just a question. Have you got anything that you can share with us on Diamond Bar's move to annex Arrow Oil, and that it goes from their area on the other side of the freeway across to Fullerton / Harbor?
I haven't gotten, I think, so whenever there are annexation proposals, they generally, when they're sent to LAFCO, our county, the CEO will ask us to comment, and we will give our comments. And generally, like, we've gotten some applications for like Laverne areas, some of the areas that are in our SEAs, and what we've commented is generally like if it's SEAs, so those protections, I mean, and we can't make those decisions. but we can't say we don't agree, or this annexation has to, or our recommendation is that it should respect the biological resources, it should respect the density that we've proposed for those sites. So we don't have that application yet for our comment. I don't know if that answers your question. So basically, I know about it, and I've talked to, I think, some of the Point Hills Habitat Authority had some concerns that they voiced when we had our conversation, but until they actually, because our planning department, we don't have authority over Diamond Bar, until they actually give us, submit the application to LAFCO, and LAFCO gives us, the application to comment on, that's where we will make our concerns, which there will be concerns,
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Adrian, this is
Yes.
Henry. Are we on the topic of land use map? Could you go to the very east side of Rowland Heights along Colima? And there's a piece of red area designation too. I don't understand.
Hold on. Let me
There's-
see. Oh, let me turn the land use map on now. Okay. Where are we looking?
Further east of Fairway. There's
Further
a
east.
small little piece of red.
Are you thinking about this one? So that little it's this. So this one's definitely commercial.
Yeah,
Is this what you were thinking about?
Yes. What is it?
So that's actually not red. That's brown. It's it reads different. It's a U5. That's developed with housing. I can go to the aerial, and that might make it clearer.
Oh, medium.
Yes. Yeah. So that's U5. Which would I can't offhand, I can't remember what the general plan equivalent would be, but yeah, so that's not red. It has that weird brownish color, and all of those colors will also be transferred to the general plan colors. So once this gets adopted, when you look at Rowland Heights on the public GIS, you'll see that the colors for the land use plan will be consistent with the rest of the general plan and with the county. Actually, I want to also clarify one more thing, and you'll see this when we do our administrative update on the map and sort of clean up some of the questions that came up. I'm gonna zoom in here. So one of the things that I think someone had a comment about was this area here on the land use policy map. I think that was online. This shows it as I think it was O going to H. Oh gosh, I can't remember H something reflective of R3, maybe H18 or next level H30. It might be H30. Anyway, so this is actually currently residential, and it has, again, because of that weird sort of the land use plan not adhering to parcel lines, because it was done at a time when the parcel, really, the GIS technology wasn't quite where it is today. This will be one of those sites where you will see that it's going to be O to, like, I think H30 or H18. And I know that's going to raise some questions, but again, it's actually to correct some of those or update some of those parcel differences in the parcel sort of and zoning designation versus the land use policy designation. So if you can see that O actually goes through. And so that actually became part of the O, but it's actually residential. So again, I know that's gonna sort of, on the map, it might look like we're changing it from an O sort of designation to an H, but it's actually because it currently is residential in an R3 zone. So again,
Okay,
that's
so-
again.
So there's already housing there, you're saying?
Yeah, and it went through the approvals, I don't know, quite a while ago. And it has a zone of R3. But because the land use policy map was not parcel based, and the GIS system, kind of the technology we have with GIS, which is, you can get really, really sort of specific, that wasn't developed at that time. This sort of, the zoning got updated to R3, but the land use stayed stayed O. And that's going to be updated so it reflects that it's actually a residential sort of middle density residential development that is existing today.
So
Any-
is the designation gonna get cleaned up on the north side of the clubhouse? There's a little residential development that was done about 30 years ago. It's kind of like a sack, like a access from the Walnut Drive. Right now, it still says A1.
Well, where are you looking, Henry?
It says U1, actually.
Right, so U1 is, that's the Rowland Heights land use policy. And so that would probably go to the general plan equivalent of, I think, like H2 or H5. So all of these U's will actually be transferring to the general plan equivalent in there. What we have the H categories in the general plan. So those will be but we're not going to be reflecting those on the map because that would make it very hard to read. But those we can share a table of what those equivalencies are. But things like that are actually just our updates, like administrative updates, would be like that sort of R3 that still has the O land use designation. But things like this that are actually consistent, it's U1, which is residential, and it's the A1 10,000, which actually might be going to the RA designation. I think most of this area is going to go to RA or R1. So that zone, the zoning type, essentially the land use type and allowance will stay the same. It'll still be residential, but it won't allow for the agricultural type uses.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think today's meeting, I think the community most interested to know is probably what I brought up last time. What's the baseline housing unit in Rowland Heights that we are comparing to when we say we're gonna increase the housing unit in Rowland Heights? Will we compare it to 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Or how do we know what are the numbers that we're shooting for eventually?
So a lot of that housing stuff will be determined through the environmental review process. So when we look at, generally my understanding is, that we're looking at what exists on the ground today, and that's our baseline. So that's my general understanding of it. But a lot of that needs to go through the environmental review process, and once we get, the policy changes, like we were showing you in the growth maps with, some areas going to either MXD or those little areas of R2, that, since those have been sort of like, we're looking at those now and kind of sharing that information, getting feedback, that's what the environmental document will actually look at and analyze. So we don't have those answers yet until we go through environmental review.
This is Roy. Can I make a comment here? In line with what Henry's saying, it would seem that if we knew what the projected housing coverage would be, all the different designations, and then what you can do mathematically is say, what is the maximum density outcome if everything, like snap your fingers and it's all done tomorrow. And that would be your maximum density, and then from there on down, you see how you could progress towards that. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. When they do the environmental review, they will be looking at what's the maximum that's allowed in the proposal. So that will be part of what they analyze in the environmental review. Any other questions?
So when you say the maximum that's allowed, that means that assuming all is built up. Is that what do you mean?
Generally, yeah. So, and that's a huge assumption because even today, what is, I think, in most cases maximum, it has not been built to that either. So it does, we will be looking at that through the environmental, but in the general sort of on the ground scenario, very few of these properties will actually ever get built to their maximum potential. Especially like even the commercial ones. I think, in general, some of them are, they're allowed to be, in some cases, at least, was it 35 or 45 feet, and they're not, and they haven't been for a long time. So every property certainly will not change hands. It's a huge financial undertaking to do that. So, but that's what will be analyzed.
Question, what are Airbnbs considered?
So the Treasury tax collector is working on an ordinance for short-term housing rentals, and that's something that they're going to be, I think, they are the lead on, and that's what they will be enforcing through that process. So they're working on an ordinance that would apply to the county.
Because that increases the number of people, cars, parking, takes away from permanent housing, all that.
Right, and because that's going to be a county-wide effort and applied sort of for the unincorporated areas, county-wide and the unincorporated, that's not something that we're going to be dealing with ordinance-wise because they're actually doing that.
I don't quite understand why the treasurer tax collector, basically they're just collecting on the revenue of the Airbnbs in the community, right? So there still needs to be enforcement or a zoning factor or a land use factor.
So they're writing the ordinance that how it would be applied and what the limitations would be. That's actually what they're doing. So it's not really. They also have ordinances and sort of the legal aspect of everything that they do. So that's what they will be doing. They'll be determining through that. And I think I sent a link on that whole program through the treasurer tax collector. But they're the lead on that, and they're developing the countywide ordinance for how it can be applied, what the limitations will be. So it goes. It's not about revenue collection. It's about actually regulating the Airbnbs. And
so our community standards cannot regulate them.
Because they're doing it countywide, and that's the process they're going through right now. And it's not really just it's a countywide issue. It's really best dealt with it countywide because it is a countywide issue. In this case, I don't think there's anything that Rowland Heights is experiencing with the Airbnbs that other communities aren't as well. They're kind of experiencing similar impacts, and that's why it's going to be countywide. If it was something that just one community was experiencing but none of the others were, then that's sort of a community-specific issue. But in this case, it's actually a lot of unincorporated communities have concerns about it. Any other questions? If we don't, it might be a good time to transition to the CSD discussion. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Audrey. And similar to what Audrey mentioned, just turn on my camera. Sorry, I'm on my laptop, so I'm not going to see too many hands raised or anything like that. So feel free to interrupt me. But this kind of part, we're going to transition away from the land use plan. We're going to sort of dive into some of the info we've received about the CSD. I'll walk through sort of the general principles again, and then we can see what we can get to. Let me just share my screen really quick. Okay. So all of the stuff that I'll be sharing on my screen today, I'm going to send it out once Audrey, sends out the recording. I'll follow up with all of this information. So feel free to take notes, but all of this will be sent out. Really, I made sure that this was designed so that you could share it with your neighbors. You can look through all of that stuff. So just a few kind of bits of information before we dive into some of the input that we received through emails. Okay, so So right now, you can access the Rowland Heights CSD online, and the link is actually, so this is sort of what it looks like, right? Part of LA County Title 22. So the LA County Code is split up into a variety of titles. Those are sections of the code. And so our planning department really only has authority over Title 22. Also the subdivision code, but that really applies to subdivisions, and that's a kind of a whole different thing that the CSD doesn't necessarily get into as much. So this is sort of what's on the books now, and really this process is seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and updating it based off of the input we receive. So as you can see on this that I'll send out to you, the link to the CSD is actually right here. So if you ever want to take a look, you can click there, and that's going to be the most recent CSD. So when this process goes forward, we will, all of this work that we do as part of this group will end up through that link. Okay, so another important thing to keep in mind, just a few things I'll kind of quickly run through. I'm sure I've said this before. Plans, sort of in your head, just a quick kind of exercise. Plans equal policy, so that's the direction that the county is initiating in. That's so if there's a discretionary review, a planner could look at the plan and show that, okay, this you know, we should ask for this, this, and this because the plan is going in this direction. Same for if there's a grant that Public Works gets to improve street trees. Let's say it's they have money from the state to plant more trees in the medians on Colima. They're going to look at the plan and say, hey, this plan has policies that say there should be more street trees in the public right of way. So let's prioritize Rowland Heights because their plan says that. So that's sort of those are really the what the plans get into, like a community plan, and that's so the Rowland Heights plan is being updated as part of this project, and that's sort of where the policies lie. The CSD and kind of by extension zoning, but focusing on the CSD, that's what's in the code. So Title 22, the LA County Code. So the barrier for something to become part of the LA County Code is pretty high because it has to be its law. So this is something that, you know, this is kind of where the litigation and stuff kind of comes into play. So ultimately, that's why a lot of times in the CSD, things have to be very objective. So another thing just to keep in mind too, the CSD, so CSD is a community standards district, and in fact, when I go back to this Muni Code section, you can see that all of these other communities, Acton, Dulce, Altadena, Alpharetta Heights, including Rowland Heights too, we have these CSDs, but you can see they're located in Title 22. The first two numbers is 22. That means that the code, the standards that we put into the CSD only apply really to Title 22. So what that means is that the CSD only applies to private property. As soon as you step out of the public right-of-way and onto property that's owned by an private individual, or you know, in some cases if it's like public property, but if it's owned by the county, same thing. But any standards that in the CSD that impact public right-of-way, including vehicles parked on public streets, including people blocking mailboxes, can't be enforced under Title 22. And thus it can't be placed in the CSD. That would have to go into another part of the code. Doesn't mean that what's been suggested about the public right-of-way isn't a big deal. In a lot of cases, I think we see that it is a big issue. But ultimately, we can only work with the tools in our toolbox, and our toolbox only extends to private property. So we'll get into, I'll have a list of all the things that we've inputted, we can go over that. But just for now, just keep in mind, if there's a reason why things can't be added into the CSD, the very good reason, a common reason is because it's in the public right of way, or we can't regulate it through private property. Another thing to keep in mind, objective versus objective standards. So the CSD can only mandate objective standards. A planner receives an application, and the processing the application must be able to check if it has to be an easy check, and this is the same for enforcement staff too, that the submitted application or the violation either meets the standards or it doesn't. Subjective standards cannot be placed in the CSD, and if there's any current subjective standards, they can't be enforced. So what that means is that let's say there's a standard in an old CSD long time ago that says that all buildings must look, have good quality architectural features and be in good standing with a large community character. It's a subjective standard. So a property owner, an enforcement staff, a planner prosecuting the case could say, well, who's to say what really the artistic standard of community character is? But if you say all buildings must have architectural features on the roof line, including cornices and totally blanking on the other, so it must have ornamentation and articulation along the facade. That's something that a planner could say, there's no articulation there. That doesn't really meet the code. So that's something to keep in mind too. So to every extent possible, if it's legal to put in the CSD, we're going to try to do that. But there may need to be some editing of the standard so that it is actually truly objective. Another point, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if this would fall under the Title 22 equivalent. I just saw today that Pomona approved overnight parking restrictions for RVs and other oversized vehicles. Would we be able to put something like that in our community standards?
So that would be something that would fall outside of the community standards district because it's in the public right of way. Doesn't necessarily mean that the county couldn't do something like that, but our department wouldn't be able to initiate it or put it in any of these tools. So that's, I know a lot of jurisdictions that do that. I think that it's something that, the public can always raise to the supervisor's office. They can always raise that to the Department of Public Works, who oversees the public right of way. And it's separate from however, it doesn't, again, so just because we can't regulate through CSD doesn't mean that it's not an issue. It just means that we can only use the tools in our toolbox, and that's going to not apply to the tools that we have, unfortunately.
And Roy, a little comment from Roy, and that is one thing that Pomona, these are cities, and they have, I'll use my term, enforceability. But we have no enforceability, especially on these matters, as you've noted. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point, Roy. So there's a different structure in the county to enforcement of the public right-of-way, and cities may have different formats of doing that. And unfortunately, we have no control over. We can certainly put things in the plan to strongly suggest it, but ultimately the departments will have their own legal authority to do that. So another thing. Compliance. So CSDs must follow state and federal laws, probably goes without saying, but if the standard does violate any laws, then those standards may not apply to development. The same thing with new laws too. Even if you have a CSD standard that's on the books now, and if a new law comes in and it supersedes local control, so if the state or federal government puts in a law that makes that overrides local control, then the new state that they can invalidate those existing standards. So it is a constant moving target. I know it is frustrating too, and especially for us because we're constantly having to review legislation. But that's just that's the facts. Yeah. And so this is kind of the next point, going back to what I was saying earlier. It's a CSD as a tool. So even if the topics can't be addressed in the CSD, it doesn't mean it's not an important issue that could be solved. And to the extent that we can, we'll put those issues in the Rowland Heights plan. But again, CSD is limited to private property. But those community issues aren't necessarily limited to private property. And finally, really big point I just want to stress, because of the input that we received, and we'll go through it as much as we can now, coming up next, but community consensus. As soon as you start suggesting updates to CSD standards on private property, specifically residential property, it's going to start to get contentious. And that's what we've seen in other CSD updates that we've done. I've worked in other hilly suburban communities in the county that are very similar to Rowland Heights. And they have a lot of the same stated issues. And what we found eventually is that there may not be exactly agreement in the community about this stuff. Doesn't mean that we can't include in the CSD, but ultimately, and we're doing everything we can to get the word out to Rowland Heights members, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that everyone is aware of all of this process, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible. But ultimately, the judge of our ability to reach out to the community is the Regional Planning Commission. And if during the Regional Planning Commission meeting, they see any disagreement in the audience or a group of Rowland Heights residents that may not like the new CSD standards, especially that they relate to their single-family homes or their ability to exercise their property rights on them, or if there's different standards, then the Regional Planning Commission could become concerned that our outreach, as hard as we try to do as much as possible, that maybe it didn't lead to that community consensus, and that could, and this is something that we're really trying to avoid, impact that ability for those new standards to be placed, because ultimately the Regional Planning Commission is really stressing to us, reaching out to as many people as possible, making sure that the community engagement is open. So all that to say that this is a group of community leaders. You all have really extensive social networks. I'm not just talking about social media, I'm talking about knowing your neighbors and seeing people down the street and all that and saying hello. So please send all of this information to your neighbors to the extent possible. And just kind of have that thought in the back of your head when we're going through these standards that that eventually the entire community will see these drafts. And so what is put in there, and if you think it's going to cause issue or there needs to be more discussion within the Rowland Heights community, we're really relying on this kind of group of community leaders to make that happen. So it's not to scare anyone or anything like that. I think we might be okay, but just really keep in mind that our Regional Planning Commission is really going to be looking at that kind of community consensus. Okay, so we have, so as you can see here, I have all of the input that you've sent to Audrey, you've sent to us, the group. I really want to make sure by the end of this meeting that we have all of that information. And I'm just going to kind of dangle something before that unfortunately, you all have homework because being community, upstanding community leaders and representatives of the community, this does require a little bit of work. So I want to focus as much time as possible today on what you submitted to us. But in the meantime, in the background, in addition to doing all the researching about the CSDs, I've also collected some standards in other communities that are probably going to be a good fit for Rowland Heights, just based off of the community input that I've heard and that our team's heard. This is from the visioning workshops, from these monthly meetings, from in-person meetings. And so what I'll send out after this is it's all this is draft language of some new ideas for standards that could be added in. Again, this is for this is based off of what we've heard, and the homework is see what you like, see what you don't like, mark it up, and let us know what you think. But just know too that what's in this draft is just new standards. These would be new things that would be added. And as part of this process, there will absolutely be a time, and it's actually baked into the CSD update process, where you'll see the entire CSD draft, all of the existing language, all of the new language, and the stuff that will be removed because it's either being replaced or updated will be struck through, and the new language will be underlined. So this is just new language, but I don't necessarily want this to cause any concern that there's not an opportunity to see it all fit together. Really, I'm just throwing this out here to kind of take your temperature on it. And so yeah, so that'll be sort of the homework that I'll follow up with. But for now, I know we have a little bit of time left. So these are the topics that were submitted by this group, and I'll just sort of kind of go down the list of things that we talked about, and we've done some researching internally. Now, all of these things will need to still run by our county council, which is our county lawyers. We still need to run these by our current planning staff to see if they fit. But for the most part, where possible, if it's in an existing CSD and we can take from that, and it fits the real need in Rowland Heights, it's probably pretty likely that we can include it. So I don't necessarily want this to be an opportunity for us to say, it's not, our intent is not to say no. It's more to try and reframe it and really try and tackle issues. And hopefully by sending those new proposed standards, we show that we're not just in the business of saying no, we're trying to really make sure that we actually have standards in the new CSD. So one of the topics that was raised, and it's sort of related to ADUs, was if there can be any standards related to having new structures built not impact solar access for solar panels or unobstructed views. And then there were also some suggestions of requiring additional parking standards for ADUs and for height controls on ADUs. So just to start with the solar systems and unobstructed views. So the CSD has to have objective standards, and there's no CSD right now in the county that regulates view sheds or solar systems for any sort of view blocking. In fact, that would actually be a subjective standard and would require design review, and that's not in place anywhere countywide for by right projects. And so, you know, if a project has a CUP or conditional use permit, then sure, I think that there's definitely the Rowland Heights community will be automatically looped in for that. But unfortunately, there's really no mechanism in our department for us to be able to regulate views or from new structures or blocking solar systems. Again, doesn't mean it's not an issue. In fact, I think we think that, you know, yeah, that there could be cause for concern that there's solar systems being blocked, but the CSD can't regulate it. And so, you know, always as a resident of Rowland Heights, you can always, you know, reach out to the supervisor's office. You can reach out to your local state assembly people to raise these issues. And we'll, to the extent possible, we'll try and put things into the plan. But unfortunately, the CSD is just one tool in the toolbox, and it can't regulate that. So with ADUs, though, I do have some good news depending on how you look at it. So I put in on this page that I'll send out to you, we have the department has an SB9 summary. And what this summary really breaks down what the state is mandating and the amount of local control that that a local government could have. So I highly suggest when you get this document, click on the link. It's actually on our public website now, not our project website, but our DRP, our regional planning website. And it goes through all of the things that are allowed or not allowed, and this is countywide. In addition to that, we do actually have some wiggle room for CSD, additional CSD regulation for ADUs. But so for example, state law that says exactly what we can change and what we can't. So I highly recommend taking a look at the summary and going from there. But just keep thinking maybe as part of the homework, what's a bigger issue, ADU heights or parking? Especially in the public right of way, because eventually, yeah, if people take over their garages and build an ADU, they can put in the driveway, or they can park out on the street.
I have a question. What exactly is by right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so and that's really important for the CSD. So there's two different types broadly, two different types of development. There's ministerial development and there's discretionary development. Sorry, there's ministerial review and discretionary review. So a by right development means it's part of the ministerial review side. So in the LA County Code, if you submit an application and it meets the zoning, it meets the land use, you're doing exactly what the plan's supposed to say. So it's zoned for it's zone R1 for a single family home or A1 for a single family home. It has a land use policy of H5 or H9, so it's for a single family home. I'm building the house, or the applicant is building the house exactly to the T of what the CSD mandates and what the county code mandates. I'm not asking for anything more. I'm just doing exactly what the rules say. The planner really, if they check all the boxes, the planner has to stamp, yes, this is good. That's called by right development. If you follow the rules, you are allowed to build that by right. The rights essentially created by the code. Discretionary review that's what kind of, if you've ever heard like conditional use permit or anything that goes beyond. So an example of that is, let's say I want to build a shopping center in Rowland Heights, but the plan says that I can only build 2 stories, but I want to build 3 stories. Then they can go through a variance process as a discretionary review. I guess another example would be, I want a restaurant, but I also want to serve brunch with alcohol from 10 to 3 p.m. That may go outside of the, that's going to trigger a conditional use permit, and the planner would have more discretion to review the specific findings. So if, let's say it's a brunch place, okay, so is the area screened? Is there enough parking? Is there, so they have to go through a list, and the planner has to have findings that would say, okay, this is good. And the CUP process, it goes to the Regional Planning Commission hearing, it loops in the Rowland Heights community groups, all of that kind of stuff. So the by right house, so CSDs are intended to help, in a way, provide those standards for by right housing. It also can provide guidance for CUP or conditional use permit processes, and I'm sure that there'll be some in Rowland Heights in the CSD now, and we'll probably maybe add some. But so by right development means you check all the boxes and you're good to go. Essentially, you're building what's allowed. That's sort of the short of it. All right, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through some of these kind of quickly, but this is certainly not the end of us talking about it. I just want to make sure that we have everything here. And so I'm going to note if we can do something about that, and maybe we get into detail next time about what those standards should be. Maybe that's part of your homework. Then I'll do some things where we still have some existing research. We still have to do some research. We still need to talk to our county council. We still need to talk to our current planning. We're going to see if we can add something. But if it's legal and we can do it, we're going to try our best to include it. So fencing materials. This is a great example of something that can be put into the CSD. I know Terry and Debbie. I know Debbie's not on the call, but Terry, you suggested a standard for no chicken wire fencing. If you could just follow up with this meeting later, just kind of clarify that, or we can also talk about it next time. But just in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get to everyone's input. But certainly, fencing standards is a great example of what can be put into a CSD. But also remember that fencing can get personal, especially on people's property. So make sure that, and we'll have to make sure this too, that when we propose new fencing standards, that it's something that's available to everyone, that it works for everyone. But certainly that is something that we should be able to handle via the CSD.
Are there fencing standards that other communities have that you can send to me?
Yeah, we do. And in fact, I think on the homework that you'll have, there are some examples of fencing standards. But if not, we'll send it your way. Yeah. But it is certainly in the wheelhouse of the CSD. So this is sort of a two-parter. So noticing area standards and community meeting and hearing standards. So I know this came from Linda. And the standards would be to increase the noticing requirements and provide other languages, and to hold 2 in-person meetings for those plan amendment updates by RPC. So I think Audrey followed up with you, Linda, about the community meeting and hearing standards. That's something that unfortunately we would have to, it's very unlikely that a CSD could write those conditions. We could still go back to our county council and ask, but I don't think that that's something that the CSD would be able to regulate. However, with the noticing area standards, I think we may be able to find a way to increase the noticing area standards for certain types of projects, but we would have to go more into detail about what those projects would be. And we'd also, again, have to check with our county council on that. We haven't necessarily received word on that yet, but just to note that in this case, in this meeting, that I wanted to just confirm that we are looking at that, and if to every legal extent that we can put something in the CSD about noticing area standards, I think we can do that.
Roy has a quick comment here, and put this toward the supervisors also, and that we should, for all intents and purposes, never have an in-person meeting. It does nothing but contribute to the carbon footprint, and the virtual situation is really inclusive. You don't have to drive, park, all that sort of stuff. So the in-person stuff, and we're getting rid of personal now. If you want to be able to see somebody, we can always hit on the camera there and get face-to-face on that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Roy. Yeah, so that is something, I think it's, especially for the county too, it's still being worked out. Rest assured, there will always be an in-person component to any sort of hearing. If anything, we're trying to increase inclusivity by having more hybrid options of joining, so we'll still have those opportunities for in-person engagement. But if someone, let's say someone is not able to leave their home for whatever reason, they can still tune in. But certainly we want to make sure that as we go through this, that we won't be mandating virtual only. It will have some sort of in-person component, whether that can be in Rowland Heights or it's part of our regional planning commission chambers. We still need to get more feedback on that. But we have noted it. Like, that is something that we are following up on.
And just one more quick thing. In-person is exclusionary. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Roy. So these last few, and just going through these really quickly, compact parking standards. I know, Henry, you've raised these. So we checked and we're pretty sure that we can alter the compact parking standards to fit with the needs of the Rowland Heights community. The next question, or the next step of that, and even part of your homework, is just to let us know. Right now, it's about a 40%. A developer can replace up to 40% of the required parking with compact parking. Whether that moves to 30% or 25% or something else, that'll be part of. And we do have all the information about surrounding cities, so hopefully we can tack it to a nearby jurisdiction. So I have been researching the surrounding cities, and we can certainly follow up on that. But definitely compact parking standards for the commercial areas where you guys made note of that. These two are kind of in tandem, the grading thresholds and the significant ridge lines. So the significant ridge lines will be mapped as part of the overall area plan project. But with that, we can also have new standards that provide a buffer from those significant ridge lines. We actually have code from the Santa Monica Mountains, which is pretty much one of the most environmentally protected places in LA County, and I think they would be a great fit for Rowland Heights. So that's the significant ridge lines still need to be mapped, but we can at a later meeting we can also go into detail about what those standards look like. The other standard that we could add that would additionally protect the hillside would be grading thresholds. So right now in Title 22, depending on the zone, if you take more than a certain amount of cubic yards off of a site, it would trigger a conditional use permit, which is going back to the by right versus discretionary or ministerial. This would be the discretionary review, where if you're transporting a lot of cubic yards of dirt from grading off site, okay, we want to make sure that there's a haul route, that trucks have a specific route they go to, and all that. Between 10,000 and 100,000 cubic yards, it's a site plan review by the planner. So we can, there is some language in other CSDs that we can take and place in here. We can, what room we have is we can lower the CUP threshold so that it would be triggered a little sooner. But we would still need to kind of like think through the numbers, but that's provided as a resource. And we were thinking, it could apply to those A1, RA, and R1 zones that are up in the hillsides for grading, especially for their subdivisions or even a single family home that cause a lot of grading. And then finally, these are sort of the public right-of-way issues, but again, I'm putting them on here because we have received information from this group about them, but it doesn't mean that they're not issues, and it doesn't mean that the plan couldn't address them in some way. Perhaps not in the CSD, it's outside the scope. So the parking in front of the mailboxes, underground utilities, the utilities are really handled by a separate part of the code, and there's the Utilities Commission. So a lot of that is really outside of the scope of any sort of by right development. They're largely more regional plans or regional utility plans. Same thing with the RV parking on the streets. I think we've addressed that. Debbie brought up a good point in one of her emails about street trees and improved medians, and also common wall materials. So like I said earlier, the wall materials, I think that's, if they're on private property, we can certainly regulate that. And then street trees and improved medians, absolutely a huge issue along Colima, and we understand that. Highly suggest you all take a walk down Colima when you have the chance. It's really not an inviting place to walk. And it does need street trees, especially in the median. So we can absolutely really stress the need for street trees in the community plan, so that when you have those grants coming down the line from Public Works or a nonprofit grant to plant street trees, they could point to the plan and say, hey, the state, or hey, the California Endowment, we need trees here for this reason, and here's the plan that says it. So that's these are all certainly issues, but trying to kind of follow up on them to make sure that we can put them in the CSD. And so those are more of the public right-of-way issues.
Just to follow up, for each of these concerns, if you found something that another area has done, can you send it underneath just so we can look at it and not have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can definitely do that. It may not, we can send examples, but again, it may not necessarily be something that the regional planning or our department can implement directly, but we can certainly provide those ideas as we go through our research. And then, but it really would be up to the community at that point, and your community leaders to really follow up with any of the powers that be to make that happen. Ultimately, we work for the community, but we are on that very narrow balance beam of Title 22, which is the private property stuff. But rest assured, yeah, when we research the stuff, we can send that your way.
James, regarding the grading, can you just move down your document a little bit?
Sure.
So you talked about whether it applied to the commercial area. I would want to add in the open space, because yes, I agree that the commercial is more flat, but I think the open space area, it's more hilly, and if they want to build on it, there will have to be more being removed.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we've noted ourselves too. So this is what this shows is the grading. And you can, I'll send a link to this, or I think I provided. It looks like I did. Oh, so if you click on this link when you get to the code, you'll see sort of the grading thresholds. But it's sort of difficult in this chart, but I tried to combine it so that if there was multiple charts, they were saying the same thing. So commercial, all of the commercial zones, all of the residential zones, and even the A zones, these are sort of the conditions, right? So site plan review, CUP, so any on-site grading is a CUP. OS, it's hard to see, but it's right here.
Oh, okay.
So, but it does the SPR. So in some cases in the open space zone, you actually may have a CUP trigger. You can, if you click on this link, it'll show when that would happen. But certainly for the for open space zone grading, I think the CSD could also we would just have to tack it to those specific zones. So just back of the napkin, thinking like an RA, any of the residential, an A1. So it's an OS. So anything in the hillside, that's where we would want to have more controls over grading. That's a great point, though. Yeah.
And just quickly, did I hear you say that comment about, I'll use my term, dressing up the center medias along Colima? Did I hear you say that? Like trees and all that sort of stuff?
Making sure that the median is planted with landscaping, all that.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, because that is not private property, public property. But, and I know you have the power to do that, is to take that county electronic sign and put it in the center median so people will actually read it, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna task you with this, and when it doesn't happen, oh, bad thing. Okay, I'm just kidding. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, right. No, I know what you're talking about. We'll see what we can do in the plan, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah. And that's something too, part of your homework with the part of the proposed code, and I don't know if this would apply to that digital sign, but in this case we have new or updated potentially sign standards, so things that look like, sorry, it's hard to see just really quick, and I know we're in the interest of time, we'll probably wrap things up soon, but this would have very specific sign standards and orientation. It would, this would ban, digital signs or like big flashing signs, that kind of thing. Whether or not that would apply to the main SD4 now SD1 sign, jury's still on that. I think that'd be in the public right away, but definitely improving access to information and just the quality of driving down and walking down Colima is a big priority in this area for sure. But that's part of your homework too, to review these standards. And again, where possible, and we can maintain the existing standards which aren't located in this draft, we can. But this is now just to take your temperature a little bit, just on making sure that these kind of make sense. And if it does, great. If not, please let us know. And if you have emails to send to us, just to make sure that we don't have things that slip through the cracks, feel free to combine all of the input and feedback into a single email once every week or twice a week. But if we get emails every day, that just increases the likelihood, because we have all these other emails in that main box, that things are going to slip through. We're really trying hard to make sure that, and this is part of the exercise today, was making sure that we communicate to you that yes, we are inputting this, yes, we are following up on all of these. It just it's taking a lot longer than we'd like, because there's all these because it's code. There's all these county council items that we need to raise with them, and also current planning, which is our process planners and our zoning enforcement staff as well. So that was a ton of information. If there's any other questions, let me know. But I'll stop sharing my screen, and then I'll definitely make a point to send this out to you all today once or after Audrey sends it out the recording.
Yeah, so I should probably, the recording generally takes a few days to upload, so today's Thursday, I'll send it out probably by Monday or Tuesday at the very latest, so that, yeah, you'll get that early next week.
Yeah. And you'll get the attachments early next week. Yeah.
And let's see, so as far as I think next meeting, it seems like continuing on with the CSD discussion and having sort of a revisit of some of the information that James is going to send out, and having a refining of like the desired standards, and a conversation to kind of specify and begin actually like crafting the ordinance itself, the ordinance language itself. Seems like those are like the next steps that we need to take for the CSD. So it seems like that might be a good thing to also keep continuing talking about through the next meeting. Does anyone have any like final questions, comments before we?
Did Hacienda Heights finish their CSD?
So Hacienda Heights actually didn't want a CSD. So they've never had one. It was something that I think came up when we worked on the last, the update to the community plan, and they were pretty adamant that they did not want a CSD. Alrighty, so with that, I wish you have a good afternoon, and I think we'll gather again in a month, the first Thursday of the month in June. Thanks again so much for coming today, for offering your feedback, and we'll send you some emails with the recording and then the information on the CSD follow-up information that James will send out too.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much.
I should have munchies for you on Saturday.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay.